and my role there will be everything, I guess, related to land issues, implementing our laws, making sure that our land use plan, I guess, gets implemented, looking at our tribal code to make sure that it can, I guess that all the work that we've been doing for the last 30 years, even 150 years, starts getting put into place. Having the Sát'meca laws will be one of them. But I just want to welcome you to this meeting. I'm very grateful for Kim for asking us to be part of this and participate in this. Really want to welcome the students. I think it's really important that our younger generation start learning about Sát'meca, who we are, who you are, where we come from, the laws that we had in place, the protocols, the processes that we had in place. Grateful to be in this building again. I love it. I do remember the brightness of the sun that comes in, and so I think this building that T-Kid has put together and the stories that they have in the windows are something for everybody. If you get the opportunity to go around and read, about the windows, because they're owned by the families, it's their story, and I think that's something that we're going to keep on considering. We're going to start implementing is that we always need to be starting with a story. So we will be, I guess, talking to two of them. One will be our flood story in the Sát'meca, and the other one is the creation story of Turtle Island that I've heard over several years. The one that we're going to play for you is by Dr. John Burroughs. He's a professor, and he talks about that, uses some of his language. He's from the East Coast. But those are things that we need to start bringing back. The traditions that we had that I keep reading about from our elders is that when they got together, they would start with telling a story. And then they would start having their meeting if they were talking about issues that they were having in their community or the nation. There was trading that was going to be coming up. So there was a lot that was going on just in the Sát'meca nation. And, I hope that you take the time, because there's so many resources out there to really learn about who we are. I hope that the students, I hope if there's teachers in here and even some of our elders, really start looking at how we develop a curriculum and just talk about the Sát'meca, where they came from, what we had to go through. One of the things that you're really not going to hear from me today in these slides is some of the trauma, the depression, the grief that we had to go through. I'm going to skip over that. I think it's triggering for a lot of people, and there's a space for that conversation. I want to talk to you about the greatness of who Sát'meca were and are, where that greatness, who our ancestors were, and some of the things that we just had to go through, and how our laws have to come from that. And I've got Kate is working with us now. We have a team, and the Sát'meca Chiefs Council and Kathleen is here. Art and Cheyenne aren't here, but the Sát'meca Chiefs Council really had only 2 staff, and we've been able to build a team. And I'm hoping that we can get out into the community, not only the non-Indigenous community, but our own Sát'meca communities, and start talking and facilitating more. So we will be looking for feedback from you just on facilitation. If some of you have ever seen or heard me speak, my preference is to be speaking like this. I'm going to try and use a computer, looking at the notes just to see how comfortable I am like that. But I would like some very honest criticism. If we can make changes or improvements on how we're going about facilitating this workshop, we'd like to hear about that, right? Because I would do it. I like giving criticism. So really want to thank you and welcome you to the Uplanuk Center to be here with us, and taking the time to learn about Sát'meca knowledge. You're here for a reason, because you want to learn. It's something that you're thinking about. It's something that you can share and carry on, because that's a big part of why we share with you. Right? Our traditions need to be spoken about and move forward, and you're here to be able to help us do that, and maybe come back and ask more. Maybe we're piquing interest in what it is that you do in your lives to be able to start moving forward with Sát'meca laws, because you are in Sát'meca. we had laws, and you'll see as I go through some of the slides how we're going to be implementing them. Because we had them, now we've got to bring them back. So I think with that, I don't know if Kate wants to introduce herself or wait, or we can go through the flood story and then maybe play the other creation story before lunch gets here. Okay. You want to do the prayer? Yes, please. Thank you. We have our own creation stories, and the one that we have, and the Sát'meca is the flood, the story of the flood. And I am going to read it on paper, but I'm hoping, that eventually I can stand up here and just tell the story. I've heard several different versions, and maybe I'll adopt my own version of it. But this is our story. We are Sát'meca, and this is our story. We have been here since time out of mind, and we live respectfully through the teachings of our ancestors. The Sát'meca used and continue to use this land. We prosper from the gifts given to us by the Creator. Our legends tell a time when people were caught in a drought. The coyote went down to the river to bring the salmon to our people. We would survive the drought. Many years later, we still use this and other gifts the Creator's given us. Over thousands of years, we learned to manage these gifts in a way that kept our people very prosperous and healthy, so as not to disrupt the delicate balance that nature requires. This paper only scratches the surface of Sát'meca culture. Our ways are meant to be lived, not read. Our culture, like every culture, is changing, but the threads of it are strong and they link us to our past and our future. We give you the gift of some of our thoughts and stories with the hope that you might begin to understand the depth of our culture and the strength of our connection to the land. There are 6 sacred colors in our way of life. There are different colors for different directions, north, south, east, and west. A color for the Creator and a color for us. Blue goes all around the outside. It is the color of the sky nation. Water, all that is here. Red is for fire, Mother Earth and us. Yellow is for sunrise. Green is for where the summer comes from. The little green mouse, he lived his whole life on this land for each and every one of us. Black is where the sun goes to rest. The black bear is there to come and heal us when we ask him for healing. White is for the north, the cleansing of Mother Earth year after year, the cleansing that we ask for. It has to be done in order, all things in order when things happen, like we started with the medicine colors. This is colors that do certain work. Same goes with Mother Earth. Certain times of the year, things grow, they go to sleep. All things are connected to the turn of one big circle. Our histories tell of how we came to this territory and how the powerful beings known as transformers, for their ability to turn people into animals, fish, stones, or mountains, traveled through the marked lands. Long, long ago, the world was very different from how it is today. There were no trees, no salmon or trout in the rivers and lakes, no berries, and far fewer plants than today. Also, there were no animals or humans. Only animal people who were settled around the world. The world they lived in was full of mysteries and many good and evil magical beings. The old man who lived apart from the world wanted to make it a better place by putting it to rights. To do this, he sent several helpers to transform the world to make it a place where human beings could live. One transformer was Coyote, who traveled through the lands east of Sát'meca, or the Fraser River. 6 other transformers, 4 young black bear brothers, their sister, and Mink paddled in a canoe up from the coast, battling with evil beings and changing the land to make it better for humans. The transformers showed women how to deliver their children and men how to catch and cook fish. These beings traveled up through the lower Lillooet Lakes, through lower Statliam territory up to Birkin, the southwestern point of the Statliam. Here the transformers stopped and announced that the upper and lower Statliam were to trade and visit together, marking the point between the two peoples with a footprint that can be seen to this date. I've seen it, it's there. Some say that the transformers carried on to Seton Lake and Shekelwash, changing a chief at Seton Lake into a rock and clearing a pass between Seton Lake and Shat, where Lillooet is today. At that point, they met Inkiat, or Coyote, who had arrived from the east of the Fraser River. He told them that he'd already set things up in the rest of the country and that there was nothing left to do. The transformers then returned to the coast. And that's just one story that we have, and we have several stories. And I think we're hoping to put a list of these resources together, and they may be on our website in the future to be able to share them, but to be able to tell them. When we have these stories, there's a lot of nations right now that are developing their laws from these stories, and some will find that difficult until you really understand the story. Some of them you're looking at discipline in there, like why the coyote was acting up, and then how he was disciplined, how another transformer may have came over and said, you can do better than this. But we're going to be looking at our stories that way, developing laws, but also looking at how the land animals, the forest community, how they interact, because they have their own system of laws, right? The grizzly bear, the matriarch, is out there. That's a big voice for the forest community. So how are they interacting with each other to make sure that there's a sense of discipline? You don't want to look at it as a priority, but they have a hierarchy out there. And I think in Shekelwash, over the years, what we've been doing is we've been doing a lot of videos. We have a lot of video cameras on our trails, and we're watching what the animals are doing out there. And there is a pattern to their movement. And so we're looking at how do we create a sense of laws or a sense of order for them out there. So, that might take a few years. Everything does. Everything seems to be researched, but we'll look at that. Are the animals creating a system of laws out there, and can we capture that and put it into laws? Because what people are always asking us, what can we do on the land? And we have to be able to respond to that by saying, well, you can do this at this time, but you can't do this because this is what's going on out there right now. There's a space that's needed by the forest community or by our harvesters, by our gatherers. They need their space out there because it was ours to use first, right? And we gave back. So that's kind of where we'll be coming from when we're developing the laws for the Statliam. There's a lot developed already, but they're not for everybody. The government thinks that we can create legislation, right? They want it to match. It's like you can't do it that way. So even the government, the way they think about laws and implementing them and creating legislation and policies will not mesh with how we want laws. We just make sure that there's sensible, sustainable, not harmful extraction of resources, because we have a relationship with the land. And I'm hoping that that's what people will eventually start understanding, is that we have a true partnership and a relationship, and we do treat the land like she's our mother. So just end with that story, but like I said, there's several stories. If we have time, we'll do the flood story. That was just, I think, the transformers going through the communities. Introducing the transformers. When we seen the footprint, we were very grateful to be taken out by Art Adolf. He's a former chief as well. And he took us down to see the footprint where the transformer, literally, there is a footprint, and you can see that It's marking our territory, but you can see that that's where he just jumped off this boulder. And then he went and, he did his work throughout the territory, and we got to stop and see another boulder where it's the same thing. It's a footprint, and you can see where they push off the boulder, and then they go and do their work. So it was really nice to be able to see that. And so I'll ask Kate to come in. We're going to play it's the creation of Turtle Island, and it's Dr. John Burroughs, and it's a video. Of course I get that chair.
I'm going to tell you a story that comes from our creation, which is this millions and millions of years ago, when the world was just all covered with water. And there was a being that fell through the sky, our trickster, Nana Bojo. And as he was falling through the sky, he was looking for a place to land, and he didn't see anything that would give firm ground to him. So he called out for help. Widu Kawashin, help me. And as he was falling, a goose came along and caught him on its back. And he was there on the goose's back for some time, and they flew over the earth looking for a place to be able to find firm ground. And they flew for days and days, and there was nothing. Eventually he called out again, Widu Kawashin. He asked for help. And in asking for help, this giant turtle emerged out of the water and gave its back for Nana Bojo to be able to gather there, the trickster figure, Nana Bojo. So on the turtle's back, Nana Bojo floated, waited, they swam looking for something firm. And it was some time and they were not able to find it. Eventually Nana Bojo called a council of the animals. Widu Kawashin, please help. An interesting principle of law. Looking to others when you try to find out what you might do in the world today. So he called on this council of animals, and he asked if anyone had seen any earth anywhere. And the answer was no, bowing. And they thought about and they talked about what they might be able to do to find the gift of the earth. Eventually the great diving animals volunteered and said, well, maybe there's something below us. Maybe we'll be able to find it there. And so first of all, the beaver dove down deep and spent a long time in the water and came up, said there's nothing there. There's nothing firm beneath what we're seeing here. Well, the otter wasn't quite convinced. The otter thought he was the more powerful diver. That's my clan, by the way, the Gigan Doden, the otter totem. So the otter dove down. And in diving down, again, spent a long time, but again came back to the surface and was not able to find anything. So then another diver went down, Mon, the loon, for a long, long time searching for the earth, came up with the same result. At this point, the council was getting discouraged. Suddenly, a little one spoke up, the muskrat, and said, I can do it, I can get that earth. And all the other animals tried to dissuade him, saying, how can you possibly think you're going to do that when the beaver and the otter and the loon didn't succeed? They were just not giving him any credit. So Nana Bojo spoke up and said, let's listen. Let's listen to this little one. It's sometimes the case that we think we know what's better when it's those that are smallest amongst us that might be able to have a sense of what can be accomplished. So down that muskrat dove and was gone for some time, longer than the beaver, longer than the otter, longer than the loon. Eventually, the council forgot about him. They went into other things, but through time they noticed up popped the water, this little object. They scanned the horizon, they saw that it was muskrat, so they swam over. There was no life. Muskrat seemed to have perished. They tried to revive the muskrat, but there was nothing they were able to do. Nana Bojo, who's known as the great hare, the giant rabbit on this turtle's back, mourned. The rest of the council mourned. And they wondered what they could do to honor this one, because he gave his life trying to bring up something for other people. Think about all the principles of law that I'm talking about as this case unfolds. What are the criteria or the standards for judgment that are found here? What is the measures that you see about how we should behave based on what this council did in trying to bring about this gift? Well, they mourned, and in mourning they decided they were going to honor him, the great rabbit, Manabojo. They laid him out with his feet facing towards the west, so he could walk across that Milky Way, what we call the Chibai Mikana, the land or the path of souls leading to the land of the dead. And as they laid him out, they wanted him to look natural. And so what they did is they started to put his limbs in a more natural position, and they started to open up his little paws. And they found sand. The little muskrat had actually succeeded in getting below the water and bringing up this soil from the depths. And they were thrilled. And what they started to do as they looked across the stars and as they looked across creation, they started to sing and to dance. And they danced on that turtle's back in thankfulness for what the muskrat did. And they put that soil in the four directions that he had in his claws on the turtle's back. And as they started to dance on the turtle's back, a miraculous thing happened. Because as they ground that soil into the back of the turtle, where there's all that organic matter, there was a generation. Things started to spontaneously grow from them. They would grow and they would decay and they would grow and they would decay until the turtle's back became covered with soil. And as they continued to dance, the earth continued to grow. And as they celebrated on that back, they were able to remember what that little one did. And they also remembered the importance of recognizing that creation is ongoing. That the process of lawmaking is not something that was just once upon a time in a frozen moment brought up from the earth. It's something that we can continue to cultivate, to inculcate, to find ways to be able to watch it grow, and it decays, and it grows and it decays. Well, as this went on, we eventually come to have what we know as Turtle Island, which is what the Anishinaabe people call North America. And this place, from this kind of story, illustrates one of the sources that Indigenous peoples have, for actually many sources. In this story, you see sacred law as being one of the sources of Indigenous law. People look to their origin stories and they try to figure out from those stories what messages were passed by our ancestors about how we might live today. Now there's other origin stories in the law. Spent the last 5 years or so.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to stop it there, but that is about an hour-long lecture by Dr. John Burroughs, if you're interested to follow up on it. So welcome to the Sát'meca Law Truth and Reconciliation Workshop. My name is Kate Cameron. I'm the Policy Advisor at the Sát'meca Chiefs Council, and you've met my colleague Michelle Edwards, the Team-One Coordinator. Just going to give you a little overview of our planned agenda for today. We'll introduce the Sát'meca Nation and the Sát'meca Chiefs Council, and next we will briefly discuss the National Truth and Reconciliation Day, and we'll spell out what UNDRIP and DRIPA are, and then break out for discussion. We've already watched the creation of the Turtle Island story. Then we'll move into sources of Sát'meca law and landmark title and rights cases, and we'll conclude with a discussion. So here's a map of the Sát'meca territory. It's approximately 2.2 million hectares. And the Sát'meca are the original inhabitants of this territory. The Sát'meca Nation is comprised of 11 member communities. So in the northern Sát'meca, that's here around Illilouette, there are 6 of these communities, and 5 are in southern Sát'meca around Pemberton area. Do you want to read them out, Michelle?
Sure. So we have Leetwat, which is in it's a southern community, Nequatqua, Shmakum, Skatine, and Hakshta. Those are all in the south. So if you go over to Duffy, then you go down and you'll find those communities. Shekelwash, Tleekit, Chalaf, Tisquila, Kaklit, Hoyston are all in the north, and those are 11 of the communities. And just a point of reference, the signing of the declaration back in 1911, we had 15 communities, 15 chiefs sign them, so that kind of shows just the extinction of some of our populations and some of our communities. And we do have two other, we have Shutika, which is, I guess it's the start of a community, and we have, is it Ulush, out in Bialacum. And, you know, those are settlements that I think that we'll start recognizing, or that we should be recognizing, because it's an actual assertion of the title that we are claiming.
So Statlia Nation today, membership is over 7,000. Thanks, Michelle. I'll keep you standing, actually. The Statlia Chiefs Council vision will be read by Michelle.
The Statlian Chiefs Council is the unified government of the Statlian, rooted in Hakman Kala, Muta, and Takum Kala, our laws and our way of life. As the unified government, the Statlian Chiefs Council is the organizational embodiment of Statlian nationhood. Nationhood respects the integrity and the autonomy of each community while recognizing our interdependence with each other.
Okay, so as we know, September 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, also known as Orange Shirt Day. In 2015, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission published its final report with 94 calls to action, urging all levels of government, federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal, to work together to change policies and programs in a concerted effort to repair the harm caused by residential schools and move forward with reconciliation. These calls to action are divided into two parts. Part 1 is legacy and part 2 is reconciliation. Just highlighted here Article 43 and 44, which both call upon the federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to fully adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework for reconciliation, as well as to develop a national action plan and strategies and other concrete measures to achieve the goals of UNDRIP. So the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, you have received those pamphlets. That includes 46 articles which outline the minimum standards for survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples throughout the world. It has support of 148 countries, and in short, it recognizes basic human rights of Indigenous peoples, along with their rights to self-determination. Canada voted against the declaration of the UN when it was first introduced in 2007, but later endorsed it in 2010 after decades of advocacy by First Nations. The Parliament of Canada passed the UNDRIP Act in 2021, providing a roadmap for the implementation of the UN Declaration based on lasting reconciliation, healing, and collaborative relationships. And in British Columbia, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, that's the acronym DRIPA, was unveiled in 2019 as Bill 41. This legislation intended to harmonize its laws with UNDRIP, making it the first province to do so since Canada endorsed the UN Declaration. DRIPA mandates action plans for each government department and annual reporting on their progress toward fulfilling the rights specified in the Declaration. The bill also gives government departments the authority to share decision-making with Indigenous governments. However, decision-making or shared decision-making doesn't necessarily mean a veto. And in this photo, Michelle, would you like to...
Yes, just to put some, I guess the group that's here that represented the nations throughout BC, so there's 3 organizations, and you'll have 3 Grand Chiefs in here. You've got Ed John, and he's the head of the First Nations Summit, and they're more of a treaty-based organization. They talk about treaties. You've got Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. He's the chief of the Union of BC Indian chiefs, and you've got Chief Terry TG, and he's the BC Assembly of First Nations chief. And when you look at the group that's here, I guess they're the ones that the government deal with quite often. And so we're all of our communities, if we want to be, we can be represented by these organizations, but collectively, we would need to go to this group and bring resolutions in front of them. We want to actually lead the discussion or the path of this group because they're kind of the movers and shakers that are out there in front of our communities to be able to talk to the government. So they're the ones right now that are really dealing with DRIPA, the Declaration, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we need to make sure that their voice that they're using is our voice. So just wanted to put, who these groups of people were, just not just a picture.
So we invite you to discuss amongst your tables. What does a National Truth and Reconciliation Day mean to you? How familiar are you with UNDRIP and DRIPA? And what are you hoping to get out of today's workshop? So we'll leave it to some breakout, a few minutes among your tables. Do any first volunteers? Yeah.
One person.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to have been invited to this session. I was a last minute invite on my behalf. I'm the SEC Executive Assistant. I work for the Stallion Chiefs Council. I am also a former chief, so we do have 3 former chiefs working on our team for the SEC. The first question, what does the National Truth and Reconciliation Day mean to me? I feel that the truth of it all is that we are still standing. The truth of it all is that the events that have happened since the discovery of our land has been covered up in our education systems, in the education of those that have come to our land, so that they wouldn't see what has taken place of trying to wipe our Indigenous people off, to assimilate us into what they consider as citizens of the Crown. The truth of it is, we are sovereign to our land. We are sovereign in Canada, no matter what they put in place, what laws that they establish. In my heart, the truth is, I am still sovereign to this land. I am still sovereign to the title of this land, and so are my future generations. What reconciliation means to me is that we need to educate our school systems. We need to also educate our governments on what that truth is. That we will still not, no matter what, I believe that the UNDA and the DRIPA have already been prescribed in accordance so that they still keep their business going as corporations of Canada. It doesn't really recognize the culture, our language. Yes, they do state that that's what they want to provide for us to get it back. But that to me is not enough. To me, we need to still help educate Canada. We still need to put forward our healing powers so that they can also heal from their trauma that they brought over from their lands. They brought that trauma over to us. That's why we were treated that way, because they had their own traumas that they were dealing with from their own countries. So for the UNDRIP, Canada put out the UNDA action plan, and its primary purpose is so that it will fold up the Indian Act, that it will no longer be there. And the way they're going to fold up that Indian Act is to have agreements amongst all First Nations. It doesn't matter if it's a reconciliation agreement, a self-government agreement, forestry agreements, any kind of agreement. They want every First Nation to have an agreement. And once every First Nation has an agreement with Canada or BC, they will fold that Indian Act up and they will bring out their fiscal arrangement plan that will cover all those agreements and funding those agreements. I feel that they are still pushing us to have title to our land, but in the form of fee simple, which is another law that is established in BC and Canada. Canada will rescind its title over our reserves, and our reserves will become fee simple, which means then, in the long run, we will have to pay taxes in order for that fiscal arrangement to be acted upon. That means that we will be paying the taxes for those agreements to be financially coming down to our what used to be reserves. I feel that in the end, I want to be very careful. I want to make sure that for my future generations, that we are still sovereign to our own land, to our own culture, that this is recognized and acknowledged by our federal government and our provincial government. At the end of the day, that's what I want to feel, that we are still acknowledged as a sovereign people. Yes, I realize that we will be having agreements with the federal, maybe, I don't know if there's another way to go forward with the UNDRIP. I'm not sure if there's another way, but I want to be able to still encourage us to work together, to stand together as we did on Turtle Island, to ensure that our laws remain at the utmost, that we still remain and uphold our title and our laws that pertain to our sovereignty, to our land and our title.
Any other volunteers would like to report back? Just maybe we'll take one more before lunch and we can resume this activity after everyone's been served. One more volunteer?
Just pick a table.
I think Colin.
This guy?
Yeah, thanks.
For me, one thing I want to take away from this workshop is, as a teacher, how to talk about sovereignty, right? And just reinforcing that in my classroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Short and sweet.
You had a good meal. We want to thank the cooks for a great meal. I want to thank Kathleen for coming up and sharing with us. I just kind of wanted to put somebody on the spot that I know is here, and then we're just going to ask the one question and then we'll start again. So I wanted to ask Christine Galeazzo, within their group, what does the National Truth and Reconciliation Day mean to you?
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. And our table, we're suggesting that what it means to all of us is it's an opportunity to learn that we need also to support our Indigenous, local Indigenous nations through this day of reconciliation. It's not just one day, it's all year round. But it's honouring and remembering, learning the truth, and an opportunity to take action. Felt familiar, next year we have certainly some representatives who work with Indigenous communities at our tables who have learned it well and actioned it. And then also, you know, it's also a basic understanding, so there's lots of learnings to be had repeating it year after year is so necessary to keep it in our minds and our daily work. And for the, what are we hoping to get out of today? A deeper understanding and education, and to be better prepared when working with Indigenous peoples in every aspect of working here in Lillooet, and to understand local laws and governments. This really helps us, and sharing a meal together is huge for developing relationships. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. It was important I think, for us to ask that question, because we're always asked that. What are we supposed to do today? What does this day mean? And we needed to pose that to non-Indigenous people. What does it mean to you? And, supporting us and being there and getting educated and really learning about it. I think that's what we want to hear. Because to be honest, that's a very triggering question to a lot of us. And just having you here to be able to start understanding that all of these discussions, all of these issues that are coming up recently are impacting a lot of us. And you'll see that, and just having the understanding of where it's coming from means a lot to us. So thank you for that, and standing up and letting us know that. Thank you. Oh, I need my, so the declaration of the Lillooet tribe, there's a story, that even comes up to that. The Lillooet Declaration was one of the many declarations that were being signed back in the early 1900s. And of course, it stemmed from a lot of the issues, the British coming in, the Royal Proclamation, just everything that was leading up. Chiefs were going over to England to meet with, the king at the time to start talking about sovereignty, the land issues, what they were seeing, what was going on. So I think it was the Sir Wilfrid Laurier. It was signed in 1910, so a year before the declaration that the Scotlans had signed. And a lot of them, James Tate is probably a name that some of you will be familiar with. Is that he married into in the Sát'meca community, Spence's Bridge. So I was asking Cookby Art Needle why everybody was going to Spence's Bridge, and it's because James Tate, that's where he lived. And so a lot of them traveled to Spence's Bridge to sign these declarations, and he interpreted the words that they wanted to put on paper. And as I had stated, that there was 15 chiefs. Right now we have 11 in the Statlian, and so there was communities that just amalgamated, like in Shekelwash and Kikaitan. That used to be 2 communities. It's actually only recognized as one, really, under the Indian Act. A lot of it had to do with funding the chiefs are recognizing back then. But I want to read you the declaration, because this is where our strength comes from. This is where the chiefs always remind us that we have this declaration. And these are some of the chiefs here that had signed it. This is my chief, Chief James Baptiste. He adopted my grandfather in traditional adoption, and that's how I'm from Shekelwash. Jean Baptiste, I said James. So it says, "To whom it may concern, we the underwritten chiefs of the Lillooet tribe, being all the chiefs of said tribe, declare as follows. We speak the truth, and we speak for our whole tribe, numbering about 1,400 people at the present time. We claim that we are the rightful owners of our tribal territory and everything pertaining thereto. We have always lived in our country. At no time have we ever deserted it or left it to others. We have retained it from the invasion of other tribes at the cost of our blood. Our ancestors were in possession of our country centuries before the whites came. It is the same as yesterday when the latter came, and like the day before when the first fur trader came. We are aware the BC government claims our country, like all other Indian territories in BC. but we denied their right to it. We never gave it nor sold it to them. They certainly never got the title to the country from us, neither by agreement nor conquest, and none other than us could have any right to give them title. In early days, we considered white chiefs like a superior race that never lied nor stole, and always acted wisely and honorably. We expected that they would lay claim to what belonged to themselves only. In these considerations, we have been mistaken, and I gradually have learned of how cunning, cruel, untruthful, and thieving some of them can be. We have felt keenly the stealing of our lands by the BC government. We would never learn how to get redress. We have felt helpless and dejected, but lately we begin to hope. We think that perhaps, after all, we may get redress from the greater white chiefs away in the King's country, or in Ottawa. It seemed to us all white chiefs and governments were against us, but now we commence to think we may get a measure of justice. We have been informed of the stand taken by the Thompson River, Shuswap, and Okanagan tribes as per their declaration of July 16, 1910. We have learned of the Indian Rights Association of BC and have also heard the glad news that Ottawa government will help us obtain our rights. As we are aware, in the same position in regards to our lands and labor under the same disadvantages as the other tribes of BC, we resolved to join with them in their movement for our mutual rights. With this object, several of our chiefs attended the Indian meeting at Lytton on February 13, 1910, and again the meeting at Kamloops on the 6th of February last. Thereafter, we held a meeting ourselves at Lillooet on the 24th of February, when the chiefs of all the Lillooet bands resolved as follows. First, that we join the other interior tribes affiliated with the Indian Rights Association of the Coast. Second, that we stand with them in the demand for their rights in the settlement of the Indian land question. Third, that we agree unanimously with them in all the 8 articles of their declaration as made at Spence's Bridge, July 1910. In conclusion, we wish to protest against the recent seizing of certain of our lands at the Short Portage by white settlers on authority of the BC government. These lands have been continually occupied us from time out of mind and have been cultivated by us unmolested for over 30 years. We also wish to protest against the building of a railway depots and siding on any of our reservations as we hear is projected. We agree that a copy of this declaration be sent to each of the Honorable Mr. Oliver, the Superintendent of Indian Affairs, the Secretary of the Indian Rights Association, Mr. Clark Casey, and Mr. McDonald, Inspector of Indian Agencies. Signed by the Statlium chiefs at the time. And so even back then, we were telling everybody, this is our land. You know, we have our own laws, we have our own ways, and you're coming in and you're imposing all of these restrictions, all of this industry development on our lands without talking to us and getting our permission. So this is what guides us. This is only one document that we'll be using to develop some of our Statlium laws. It was a document that we used that our elders had put our tribal code together, and that's something that may be shared at some point in the future, but it'll be up to us to be sharing that because we want to be educating the people, especially in the Statlium. Well, we did the creation story already. I'm hoping that everybody enjoyed the creation story. I think every nation probably has a creation story. So we'll get to the sources of Statlium law. So the elders feel that it is important for our people, and especially the younger ones, to know our customs, our own ways, in order that they can be picked up before it's totally lost. And again, that's our tribal code. We have a tribal code that was put to, our elders probably for about 20 years sat together and put all these tribal codes. And they put it together for not only the chiefs, but the people, the younger generations, so that they know how we need to be proceeding in our life in a good way. And so they put their words into writing, and the code is actually was spoken in Statlium, and then they had an interpreter there put it into writing. Who we are. And this picture, I wanted to, you know, the Sát'meca are joined together as one, people who think and speak as one. Sát'meca is the language spoken. We are Sát'meca Nation. I just wanted to show you some of the images of our Sát'meca people. This is down in the southern communities. It's a mother with her children, and she's weaving. And, you know, when you go to who we are, we were harvesters. You know, we were actually master craftsmen. We were weavers. You know, and that's even to go out and collect, I guess, the bark, the cedar that had to be collected to go and make these baskets. There was a set of laws that had to go with that. And within her community, she would have had to know when to go get them, what the proper time, how to prepare to go and do it, if she had permission to go and do it, to make sure that she wasn't going to over-harvest any areas when she actually went out harvesting, so she could make these baskets. You have the mother with her child, and you know, you see that quite often. You know, when you look at the image of the mom carrying her baby, and when I look at it, and people may see it differently, I look at the care that was taken to make the baby carrier, the clothing that she had to make sure that she was clothed and that her baby was clothed. You know, just the resources, again, every resource that you see here had to come from the land, meaning that we were using, you know, the buckskin that was, you know, used to make these jackets to fit our chiefs, all the cedar, all the hides that were done, even the wool that was woven to make everything. In order for us as a community, as a nation, to move around on the land, we had to have this set of laws put in place by generations before us to tell us who we are, how we actually move around on the land, and the resources that we're using out there. And this picture is, I believe, it's an amazing picture. I think it's taken probably where, just at the bottom, or where the courthouse is. It's going to be around that area. And, you know, in our declaration, it says our ancestors fought wars for our land a long time ago. And the declaration speaks of this. And, you know, this would have been our chiefs getting together back then, recognizing, you know, that there was people coming in. And they were there to try to tell them, we have a way for you to actually be moving around on our land. We have a way for you to come and talk to us, and you know, maybe we can share these resources. We have a way for you to go out there and be extracting resources, not to just see you know, everything as we need to get it as soon as we can and take it and extract it. And so we had all of these leaders and their wives gathering often. Probably in the, you know, about 1870 to 1911. There was a lot of gathering of chiefs across the interior, especially getting together, putting in words, sending letters to the government that we know this land belongs to us. We've been looking after it. What are you doing about it? Why are you coming in and taking advantage of the lands and the animals and the resources and destroying them? And I put these images, this is the true way of life of the Sát'meca. And when I talk about the greatness of our ancestors, I talk about when they lived in our communities. And if nobody knows what these images are, this would be Keatley Creek up in Fountain. This would be Hoiston out in Bridge River, and they're looking down at house pit villages. I remember flying over Keatley Creek after the fire that was up there, and they used to be covered in sagebrush, and it just opened it right up. Everybody's like, wow, what's all that down there? Even myself, I didn't understand that there was a big village site there. But one of the exercises I wanted to have, and we won't have the time to do it here, is when we look at a village site like that, even if you looked at Hoiston, and you're out at Keatley, Hoiston is actually almost directly right across, it's over the mountain, but it's almost right across from there, and there would have been a communication process, meaning smoke signals would have been a part of that. But when we look at these village sites, you would have to have policies in place, if you wanted to call them that. You would have had a process in place, you would have had a hierarchy system in place, you would have had patriarchs. What did it take to make that? Why is that village site actually there? And when you look at house pits, and there are several hundred, there's probably 1,000 like that, probably in the nation. But what did it take to build each of those house pits? Right? It would have taken a group of men to go out and get the trees. You would have had to bring them in. They would have had to peel them. They would have had to cut them. They would have had designers in the community on how we're going to build this house pit and how we're going to make sure that this community can sustain itself. So you had engineers, you had designers, right? You had to have the laborers to go and do all this. You had to have the surrounding forest to be able to do this. You had water sources right there. If you go out into Houston, and if you can read, I think it was, they had done one of the house pits out there, one of the larger ones, and had documented that there was 23 floors. Not meaning that it was 23 floors high, but that they had built that house pit 23 times. They built it and they burnt it. They built it and they burnt it. And it was something they documented. So that's the continuous lifestyle that we had in these places. That's the continuity that we talk about, that the chiefs are talking about in our declaration. We had a way of life, right? We were very happy, right? We were, we established ourselves. We had these communities who were excellent tradespeople, excellent craftsmen. They were teachers. We were all of these great things that, we see that, wherever your ancestors have come from, did the same thing. I don't know that they would have lived in house pit style homes, but they would have went out. They would have had to flint, make arrowheads. They would have had to make tools out of stone and wood. But when we look at these villages, it would be nice at some point if we have a gathering or even a table back there of Kim has one of these on who would everybody have been in this village? What would have all of the tradespeople have been? Where were the teachers, the medicine people, the food people? You've got cash pits, I believe, are up here. So you've got this kitchen that was created over in this corner, right? So to me, I would ask the question, was that one place that we went, did we have one core area where they were just cooking and then you brought it back? Like, we don't even know these things, right, until we do more studies in there. But to have communities like that, you would have had a sense of order, you would have had discipline, you would have had to have laws to live in a community like that. And what would those laws have been? And, the law of the Sát'meca, the purpose of the Sát'meca tribal code, it will be good that the Sát'meca take care of one another. This is words from an elder. And they will all follow the law of the Sát'meca code because it was made so it will help us. And that's an elder speaking who had developed the code. And, one of the reasons I use these photos, so if you look at the law of the Sát'meca, and so where the fish weirs are, we had fish weirs at the head of, or out at Seton Lake. You could actually walk across the lake where the pier is now. Before they dammed it, the lake, it was, the water levels were low enough that you could walk across the lake. So we had fish weirs there. And it would have been my community and it would have been Shalab. We would have had to created a relationship, a partnership in order for us to go out there and do our fishing in this way, to be able to catch the fish. We would have had a means of putting these weirs together and taking them apart. Where are we going to go and collect all the resources to put these there? And then, we had drying racks down there. You can see the kids in the picture there were a big part of making sure that traditions were passed on with the weaving. Again, there's patterns, there's family patterns. Right? You couldn't just weave a basket and put a pattern in there. These patterns were passed down from generation to generation. It was an identifier, right? You couldn't just make up your own. Look at the knives, the spears. I've actually found spear points like this out in our territory. And I've hid them on the land. You don't want to tell an archaeologist because they'll come and they'll take it. They'll just put it in a drawer somewhere. And that's a law that we need to come up with because they ask us to. Oh no, we've got to take it. It's like, no you don't. We're just going to put it over here, we're going to document it, because that's what our ancestors would. We don't need you taking them and just putting them in a drawer, because that's normally what they would do. But you look at the craftsmanship of how they even would have had to do this, and these could have been used for generations and generations. Like, our history is literally everywhere in the Sát'meca, and I was very fortunate to work for about 6 years with our heritage crew, and I've seen a lot of the territory and came across our village sites, our culturally modified trees, found arrowheads everywhere, even found continuous sites, I guess, where, and when you're digging and you find an arrowhead here and then you find an arrowhead down here, that shows that there was a continuous use of that site. And that's something we're always asked, show us and prove to us that you have continuous use, and we can do it. We have proven it. I don't think that we should have to prove it, but we do have to. I always say, you prove to us that you own this land, right? But they won't, you know. You know, and then again, our chiefs down here made these laws, right? That's who we had to follow. They were there for a reason. They passed on these knowledge, all the training, the traditions. You know, they had to make sure that our communities had these relationships, because we had I guess an economy of trade, and it was probably one of the most sophisticated economies that we had out there. You know, we traded right across Turtle Island. Right here, that we had dried salmon. Right, we had to really fight for the land that we had here, because we had dried salmon. And there's stories that I was reading about the Chilcotins always coming in. They were always coming down and, you know, fighting with us and warring with us and taking the women as slaves. And even one of the elders talked about that they had claim to the Sát'meca for about 15 years. Right, and we went down towards Estola. We were down in the southern Sát'meca territory. And it was the resource. Like, we even warred with each other. We had to make sure that we had this. This was our resource. We were excellent tradespeople. But it was the Chilcotin at one time had our lands for at least 15 years. And I was really surprised to read that yesterday. Right, because I always thought, you know, we warred. You know, we fought with them all the time. I didn't know that they ever really got control of our land, but they did. And that just shows that, you know, it was always resource driven. It's like today, you know, people, you know, want to come in for resources. And, you know, I'll bug the Chilcotin. We're going to go see them in about a month, because, you know, Chief Joe Alphonse, and he's quite a loud chief as well, very rough and aggressive. And I always bug them, you know, like, Stwan was like our gold, right? We didn't have any use for gold. The only use we had for it was we chucked it at the Chilcotins when to invade our community. And we can laugh about those things, right? Humor is a big part of who we are as people. And, you know, we warred with them. One of our last wars was with the Chilcotin, and it was up in Graveyard Valley, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk with them about. But if you know, from conflict comes laws, right? So we had to start establishing these laws because we were having conflict with our neighbors over resources, right? If we wanted, if people wanted the fish, what could come out of this river, then we had to war with them. We warred with the Inlatakman. We played lacrosse before we went to war with them. So there was a system of how we actually got to fighting. You know, but that's something that we had learned from a university that we're going to be working with, is that laws are developed from conflict. Transformer stories is another way that we're going to be looking at our laws and how we develop them and making sure that we piece them out of there. And so, you know, you have, you know, you've got the muskrat, which was, you know, that was the one who was responsible for the creation of Turtle Island. You've got Inkiat, or coyote is the trickster. We've got the bear and we've got the coyote in one. And in one of our stories, we had four brother bears who traveled with the trickster through our territory, showing us how to utilize the resources. And so when you look at, I'd seen a statement, and I think Mariko had gone to Winnipeg, and she went to the museum over there, and she had this picture of a statement. And it said, the land was created by a power outside of human beings, and a just relationship to that power must respect the fact that human beings did not have a hand in making earth. Therefore, they have no right to dispose of it as they see fit. And that's something that probably every nation on Turtle Island believes that. And I think if a lot of you have talked to other nations other than Statly, and if you've gone to over in the Sát'meca or even over in Alberta, I don't know what they're all called over there, Cree maybe, that they'll talk about transformer stories. They'll talk about their trickster. They'll talk about these values that you probably hear us talk about. And those value systems, again, went back to our economy of trade on how we had to work together, this relationship of resources. It was about supply and demand. So Statland title is synonymous with the exclusive right to occupy and use the land and resources within Statliam Nation territory. Statliam title includes the right of Statliam Nation to govern how its land and resources are used. And again, that's words of wisdom and strength from our elders. And I just wanted to use these two bears as an example. So this is Star and Moon. They're orphaned. And so in Shekelwash, one of the things we're trying to do is put grizzly bears back on the land. You know, the land is missing their voice. They need them out there. There's a system of hierarchy that goes on with the forest community. And if they're missing part of it, then their lives are also disrupted. And so we looked at bringing, they're not sisters, but they grew up together. They were orphaned at 4 months. Their mothers were killed. And they were raised on this property up in Terrace. And so we thought, well, let's keep them together. Let's bring them down. Let's put them out there. They're collared. You know, they each took, 50-minute flights up into the back end of the mountains, and they were dropped off. And just after this, or just before this picture was taken, they actually ran to each other and they hugged.
Oh.
Right, so that just shows that they have this bond, that they have this relationship, and then they were going to be able to go out and do what they needed to do on the land. And it was funny because we had conflicting laws or conflicting issues with the province, because where we were bringing them is a protected park. In that conversation, they actually didn't want us to bring grizzly bears out there because they might eat all the food out there, and we thought, that's just ridiculous, right? That's the kind of thinking that we need to change that thought, right? Like, why would you even think that the grizzly bears are going to go eat all the food? The amount of work we had to do, we had to make sure there was enough food out there for the bears. We even had to look at, are these fish bears, because there isn't salmon up there. So there's a lot that we had to look at before we could even bring the bears out there. Unfortunately, the fire started, and in survival mode, they took off and they ran. And you've probably seen pictures of Star and Moon out on the Duffy. I think Moon might have turned back around and went back up. Star, we had to fly her to the back end of the mountains again, and hopefully she's okay. I think she got a bit too habituated, right? But that's something that we need to learn. Because even for us to do research like this, it's hard for us to say, should we be taking these animals and putting them on the land where they're not really from, right? Should we have done more? Did we do something wrong? How can we do this better, right? Because we disrupted their lives. We did it, like I always say, they were living the best day of their life, and then along comes humans, picks them up, and they wake up and they're in another nation's land, right? But that's just us asserting our title, our jurisdiction, and looking at how our laws would be used to bring the animals back into a territory where they've been missing, where they've almost extirpated grizzly bears in the Duffy and Texas Creek corridor. So again, Statlium title, and this is, I've heard this, there was a professor on a podcast, and he was talking about land back, and what he said about it, and I really liked it, he said, we want jurisdiction and control over our territory, the authority to make decisions on how the land is used, and the right to the benefits that flow from the exercise of that authority. This is what land back means. And I always wondered what that actually meant to a lot of people. Like, you know, we could walk around and say, we want our land back. You could say that all day, right? And people would interpret it differently. But that's what it means. We want the jurisdiction and control over our territory. You know, we want the authority to make the decisions on how the land is used and the right to the benefits that flow from that. And we've said that for years. It's not like, you know, we just started saying it, you know, when the term land back came up. And again, that's where our laws, when we're being asked, what is Statlium laws? What are the ways? Right? It started years ago in the extraction of our resources. So this is actually when you see it. This is what we want. We just want the control, the authority. We want, you know, the benefits that come from all of this. Now, our history is written on the land, literally. I was looking at, I was researching the fur trade, and I was just talking to somebody about these birch bark scrolls that we find in some of our cache pits and in some of our house pits. And I always wondered, what were they? What, you know, they were just in there, were we storing berries in them, or they used for pouches? And on this one, you see that they're documenting, you know, a little bit of their history. But what I read in the fur trade is that they were coming across communities who were using them to document their sales, how much inventory they had. And we have so many of them in our community. We had a dig in one of our cache pits, and they're actually rolling out of a house pit. And I never thought to open them up because they're always just in scrolls. Right, they're all just rolled up, so now we actually need to go and open them and see if there's anything on them. And I'll brag about my community in the past because we hosted the trade gathering, so it makes sense that in our cache pits and in our house pits, we have all these birch bark scrolls that are probably documenting what the sales and the inventory is, that everybody was, I guess, just the network of revenue streams that were going on back then. So I thought that was really, really cool. I just happened to read that, and I never knew what they were. They were just birch bark. I called them rolls. And, you know, you just add a SC, you get scrolls. And then we've got, again, our history is written on the land. You know, the story of our relationship to the earth is written more truthfully on the land than on the page. It lasts there. The land remembers what we said and what we did. You know, words of our elders. Again, and if you look at our paintings, and we've got pictographs everywhere. They're everywhere. I think every Indigenous community, every Indigenous group has a way of documenting their history in writing, and it's pictographs. And I happened to my previous chief, Cookby Perry Redan, and he always talked about, you know, our people were here and the Roman Empire wasn't even built. And that's true. I actually Googled it. It's like, what was going on 3,000 years ago? And it said Rome wasn't even built. It was just 7 mounds of dirt out. And it's like, wow. So, you know, listening to my chief, but this was documenting, again, our history. What was going to be in watersheds, what you were going to find out there. The stories were literally written on the land. You know, you've got the petroglyphs. We've got these throughout the territory. Right? And if you see them, they're amazing to see, and to stand there to try to interpret what they say is even something else. And again, that's a sad part of some of our history, is we literally have to try to interpret our history. because it was taken away from us so quickly. And we probably only know 5 or 10% of who our people were because of smallpox, the epidemics that came in and literally killed off way too many, way too quickly. Right? But the workmanship that had to even go into something like this. And again, it would have been a group of people. That would have been their role in the community, was to create these writings, to create these etchings in the rocks. And we've got a sandstone, it's huge, a large piece of sandstone in our community, and there's etchings in there. And we always say it's only going to be there for so long because as the rain and the erosion gets to it, and those etchings are starting to disappear. We've got a place in our community, and I'm going to have to go and look for it, and it's a rock. There's a stream coming down, and we were tool makers. I'll let people know in our community we were the tool makers. And I found a site where we would have made some of our tools, where we would have made some of our weights for fishing. And it's a nice stream that's, flowing through our community. And it's got this big boulder, this big round boulder. And it's a little bit of a waterfall, nothing too major, probably about, 1.5 meters, 2 meters. And just that little bit of water is starting to, it's drilled this hole. It's probably about, 10 years ago, it was about that deep. Who knows how long that took. But when we found the fishing weight beside it and put it where that hole was, it was perfect. It was so you, and the black sand that was below it was there. So all the resources that you actually needed to make tools were all in this one spot. Right, so there would have been a community, there's mat lodges just above it. There's a trail, that's got about that much thickness of a depth to it. There's trail marker trees, there's fire starting trees, there's gardens, right? So there was a whole community living in that were right on the trade route. If you walk in there, there's cash pits all over the hillside, right?
I just have a comment about the petroglyphs and the pictographs.
Mm-hmm.
In Lytton, they were finding that the fires were damaging their petroglyphs and pictographs, and not the fire, but the smoke. Like if there's vegetation underneath, when that vegetation burned, the smoke just blackened the petroglyphs and pictographs. And they had a hard time figuring out how to clean them without damaging what was underneath. And so now they've gone out, they've had crews go out and look for all the petroglyphs and pictographs and take all the brush from around them, so that if there's a fire, they're not going to have that issue of the heavy smoke.
Well, that's good that that's found out, because now it's something else that we have to do. I know there's pictographs that have been painted over, spray painted over. And you can actually take that spray paint off. Turpentine, but using moderate and slow, will actually take the paint off of the pictographs, right? Because the pictograph, it's all mineral, where the turpentine has got its chemicals and stuff. So it's different. And I talked with the archaeologist about that, because we have pictographs in our nation that people have spray painted over. But these are evident everywhere. Again, very fortunate in my career to be out there finding them. And they're in almost every watershed. Some of them tell you that you can't go there. I've been told that I can't go look at the ones in my community and enterprise. Only men are supposed to go look at them. So I've listened. I've never gone to look at them. And then I just was reading again that up in Enterprise, that was the place for the men to go for 4 years. So they would, from boys to men, that was how they had to go and do their transition and grow into manhood. So it was a sacred place for them, right? So if you brought a woman in, there was too much power being brought in, it was going to overpower what the men needed to do in there. So when somebody tells us we can't go look at these sites, we have to adhere to that gathering.
Sometimes the elders don't want to divulge where pictographs are, because when you tell others where the pictographs are, who goes there? Everybody goes there. Those who do not respect it will paint over, chip it, scar it. No more pictographs. So just a heads up that some elders don't want to divulge.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll walk by them every day of your life and not even know that they're there, and some communities will invite you in to have a look at them and to educate you on the pictographs. So a core value is respect for all part of creation, which includes a responsibility for past, present, and future generations. See you, kids. Have a good afternoon. Coach Deb.
School's over.
The responsibility for past generation includes listening to the ancestors. All components of life and culture are understood as related and integral to the whole. The present responsibility includes a respectful relationship with the land, resources, and people under our stewardship. That is sustaining for this and future generations. And again, it goes back to the respect, and if you didn't respect us, this is how we took you out. But it just, again, goes to show the discipline that we had and, using the resources on the land, because that is what we had to use. This picture right here, so years and years and years ago, these are atlatls, right? So it would have been a precision hunting tool. It would have been something that you would have put a little spear at the end and you would have just whipped it, right? And then over the years, I forgot to put a picture of it. And I always say it's the evolution of convenience. And I think we all know what that is. The more convenient our lives can be, we want it to change, and we seem to make those demands. The bow and arrow came in after the atlatl, right? So somebody thought, okay, I want to make this easier. And so that's just the thought process back then, that there was an evolution that was going on in indigenous nations right across Turtle Island, right across the world. Right? Convenience seems to be something that we all have in common. Again, just looking at the sustainable uses, and what I'm trying to get to is that we had a way of life. Right? We had to have structure to that. When we went out hunting, we were, using the resources. We would go out and we'd collect wood. We'd have to collect stones. We had people to make our tools for us, and it took a long time to make these tools. Our clothing, right? Having to go out to go hunting, and then you're providing your family with meat, and then you're providing your loved ones with buckskin so you can make clothing, right? You would have had the artwork, I guess if you want to call it artwork. That's you had quills from porcupines. Right, we had the beaver, I was listening to it's called True Story, and the second part will be coming out on Saturday, and I would encourage you to actually watch it. But there was just this moment in there where they're talking about the fur trade, and when they come over here, and the Englishmen, they liked the felt so that they could make all their hats. It's funny because we used it for underwear. So it's like we're putting underwear on their head, and it's like, I guess we could probably see what was going on there, but just to show that we were craftsmen, we were tailors, even looking at the horse tails, the feathers, and we have a lot of this is still in museums. And one thing is, how do we bring all this back home? Because we'd really be able to understand our movements on the land, the timing, what the actual animals were. I talk about lacrosse. Over in Quebec, or Ottawa, they have a museum. It has all of our lacrosse gear over there. And if you look at it, it's beautiful, right? The headdresses that we had before when we went and played lacrosse, before we went to war. And the one thing I noticed with those headdresses is that it's got all this feather work on there. And to us, we'd be able to look at it and go, okay, what were the birds we were hunting out there? Right? Are they extinct? Are they extirpated? The armor that we were using. It's got the nets being made from hemp. Well, where was all this hemp that we were collecting? Who were the ones who were weaving the hemp, right? So there was this lifestyle that we had that we wouldn't have had if we had no sense of order. And this, again, is just showing, I'm using the porcupine because I've always heard my community was the porcupine people. And we had a lot of porcupines in our community. Our dogs used to come home and, face full of quills, but probably in the last 20 years we haven't had these porcupines, or we haven't had our dogs or animals showing up with a face full of quills. And I was getting really worried about that. And Cheryl was going out to look at the cameras, look at our wildlife cameras. And I was telling her about the porcupines, and she sent me this picture. And it was the picture of the 2 grizzly bears. I was like, wow, look at the size of those porcupines. She's like, no, those are the 2 bears. And I go to the next picture, and then there was two porcupines on there. So, so they're getting back on the land, which is telling us that something we're doing is right, because I feel that my community, we do a lot of restoration. We manage our lands. That's what we're told to do. If we want to claim ownership or responsibility, then we need to physically be looking after it. And the reason I wanted to show this is because we would have had a relationship. We would have made offerings to the porcupine and making beautiful headdresses. Like even, some of the jewelry, I've got pine needles, I've got porcupine quills, right? So it would have been a use that we would have had with it, but again, we wouldn't just go out and take them all. We would have had to use it just for enough for our community, and if there was a trade item, but we had to make sure that the land was still sustaining what our economy was. Again, using the buck, and if you look at the antlers, right? There were so many tools that were made with the antlers. Like there was a full use of the buck, the clothing that would come out of it, right? The meat that you would get out of it, right? To make something, like this, you had to go hunting. And when I talk about the villages that we have, and if we have a village, say, using Keeley Creek as an example, and, I'll say maybe there's, 6 really large villages. And if everybody that was living in that village, and people will say about 1,000 people in these villages. Well, we had to provide for everybody in our community how many, deer were we going to have to go and hunt. So it tells you there was a very healthy population, a very managed population of animals out there in order for us to sustain what we needed to do in our community. Right, there was a way that they went hunting. There was a way that they managed the land using fire so that they knew the animals would come back there and be feeding so that if they went hunting, they knew where they could go. Wisdom to know the difference. Only take what you need. Take care of the land and the land will take care of you. And everybody talks about fire, especially these days. Right, and we've been saying it for years that we need to be doing more work on the land with fire, but it was work, you wouldn't just go light it up. Right, there was a lot of work. If you look at the community again, if you were building this village and there was a forest around it, well, you're thinning out that forest by going and harvesting the poles to put up for your structures. Right, you're harvesting the smaller pecker poles, I don't know what to call them, for the siding on there. So there was a really well thought out clearing that was going on around your community so you could light it up and this fire was just going to burn really nicely through there. So you had to have that kind of planning, that kind of knowledge in order for our villages to actually be sustained, in order for them to survive if a fire came through. If you went to the higher elevations, again, if you go up into the territories, you'll find mat lodge sites, right, or harvesting or summer homes, right? And if you go around them again, you're going to be looking at how you're building them and you're taking resources from around that little community. So then if you wanted to go and burn, it was a low intense fire, right? And what it was doing, it was bringing back the berries, it was bringing back the grasses. It was going to bring the deer to come in and feed. Yes, Gasper?
Our peoples used to, at times, burn whole mountainsides off. We do it for gathering berries. We do it for allowing deer and caribou and elk and moose to perpetuate having their foods regenerate in burnt out areas. I mean, this was just a natural course that we somewhat developed on our own. I mean, and it continued up until the settlers came in, kind of disrupted us.
Yeah.
Made it illegal.
Yeah, well, it all leads up to those settlers. But we had one of the laws that we're being asked to work on is the Wildfire Management Act. And we're hoping that we're actually heard and they use some of our principles, our way of doing things on the land, because you see what it does. You see the fires ripping through communities and everybody losing their way of life and their livelihood, not just our people, it's non-Indigenous. The work that we've been saying we should be doing for, hundreds of years, now they're going, oh yeah, maybe we should have been doing that, right? So they see that what we're trying to get into is we're going to try to have people in incident command, right? Because I know a lot of us will blame these bigger fires or some of the catastrophic getaways on the back burner, right? You've got somebody coming in, not from here, or just want to light it up. Well, you can't do it like that. There was a way, again, that we did it, right? And it was going out and doing the work. Some of you who are local may see the fuel, it's called fuel mitigation or fuel management, just reducing the large woody debris in our forest. Well, the government, they're funding that, but there's, restrictions to where we can do it, right? So we have to keep it away from the communities. Where we've always been saying, let us do it right at the community, because we want to save the community. We want to save the government from having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars fighting fires, because they seem to have found millions and millions and millions of dollars since, the early 2000s, recently 2017 and on. Well, maybe instead of spending $1 billion, offer up, $100 million so we can go and do mitigation. Save these families from the depression, the trauma, the grief that they're going to go through, the trauma. That's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. So we have to make sure that they hear what we're saying about using fire on the ground, especially our communities. And, we've got to, I think, every day, very thankful that my community is still there. But at one point, we're going to have to do what everybody else is doing in fighting these fires. So early trade, and it started way back in the 1600s. A lot of it started on the East Coast. I think on the West Coast we were trading, I believe that was with the Russians in maybe the later 1600s, but that's who we were trading with. But when they got here, they seen that we were sophisticated, that we had something set up, that we had a way of going about, providing, right? We had a supply of stock, we had the demand for it. And we had, obviously we had a lot of beavers, because a lot of it was the trading of beaver, felt and pelts. Right, so trade cannot be financed without capital. We had to build transportation methods such as boats. We had to build large public buildings and maintain armies to provide order. These required community investments that were based on a future to return to the community and to individuals. And I'm talking about our people. We had to have those people in place, knowing that all these traders were coming. Just like any other country, you had to have the people there if you needed to go to war. If you didn't have a population of people to go to war, you didn't want to fight, or you knew you were going to be overtaken, or you had to retreat. Right? So we've seen right away the leaders back then identified they're coming. We need to make sure that we're set up for what is coming for us. And they welcomed the discussion. Right? They brought them in because they were offering something to them. We had to create institutions to facilitate trade. From Alaska to California, we agreed on a common trade language, and that's Chinook. And Chinook is a jargon that a lot of people use. If you say Mowich, other nations say, it's like, hey, that's Statman. They're like, no, it's not. We use it. And so I learned it's Chinook jargon. We recorded transactions relating to labor and goods. We achieved this because we created a system that was supportive and encouraged individual initiative. And again, using the birch bark scrolls, that's what they mentioned in the early years, is that's how they were keeping track of what they were selling, what they were buying, what they were trading, right? So there was, that was in place. And, so when they showed up in the 1600s, we were probably still living in our house pits, right? Coming out. They already knew, we already knew Chinook jargon because we were trading with each other, and then we had to teach it. I guess it was more the oblates, I think, were the first ones to really come over, and that's who we would have started conversing with. And I don't know if it was more of a spiritual connection, but they tried to identify who our spiritual people were in the communities and then go and have those conversations. But the oblates seem to be the ones who have all the diaries of our history. They're keeping them very close to them. They're still in museums. We're really not given permission yet to go and have a look at them. The Chilcotin, and I know when they went for the title case, they still had some of the oblate diaries in the community, and they were able to use them. And they talked about how sophisticated the economy was that they came across when they got in the Chilcotin, how everything was set up, and everybody had a place, everybody had a job to do all these things. And you can see from this, like the trade network, right? I just wanted to show you a map of what we're calling Turtle Island, that all nations across Turtle Island had something that traded, and that was with each other, not even before European settlers got here. We actually traveled around Turtle Island and traded, right? We had dry salmon. A lot of people came here. We were a community or a nation that was part of the Grease Trail. And there's probably, I'd say, 7 main grease trails. And then there's little arms that stem off from them. Gasper?
Pre-Pilgrim days, our people used to go down to the river and start harvesting the fish. And if you ever go down to the Frasers, a lot of the rock have big holes in it. We used to utilize those for boiling fish heads, fins, and guts, and whoever was pursuing the trade of making oil, you catch a 40-pound spring salmon. And back in the days, when summer was you put the salmon on the rock, and it literally kind of cook it. You flip it over, you cut the head off. That was the container. But these holes that were on the river rock, we'd have somebody continually feeding it with lava rock, which was heated up. And it is boiling, and you're just continually feeding everybody's, somebody be gathering the fish heads and the guts and the fins, be continually throwing it in there, and you'd be skimming the top, and it gets to a point where it is mostly oil left in there, and then you start ladling it off. The ladle would be a bighorn sheep or a mountain goat horn. That's what you're loading up these big skins of spring salmon. Eventually, you go and trade with people down Washington, over the Rocky Mountains. You even go to the coast and trade with their Ulican oil. This is trading oils. But we had grease trails. It's part of our commerce.
Yep. Yeah, like I said, there's several of them, and can't really tell on here, but if you went out, Goldbridge Way and kind of headed west, we'd actually get to the inlet, and that was our trail. And I was probably one of my first classes, and there was a lady from Campbell River, and she talked about, well, she was the one that said Malach, and I thought, hey, that's what we say, and learning the Chinook jargon. But we talked about the grease trail, and she said, hey, we have a grease trail. And, and it was, so her trail was the one that led to here. So we traded with her community. And if you ever can, watch a video on how they make Ulican oil. It takes days and days and days. And everybody has a job. And you start as a child. Again, they have a system and order of how you can actually become even the one who does the stirring, the one who actually does the draining. There's a whole system to make all of these oils. So for the Hudson's Bay Company, and again, they were all over the place. So this telling of the HBC starts in London, the epicenter of British Empire. It starts there because although the story of HBC is a Canadian story, it's a transnational one too. It's the story of an English company claiming and helping to colonize huge swaths of North America, inhabited by sovereign indigenous nations. From London parlors to free communities to the US Senate, it's a story that connects Canadian history to world history. To the demands of European consumers, the decisions of English officials, the aspirations of Scottish traders, and the futures of diverse Indigenous peoples. It reminds us that although Indigenous history is inseparable from Canadian history, they aren't always the same. Well before the establishment of Canada, which was never, oh, sorry. Okay, I lost. Was that the one I was on? Okay, never mind. Which was never a foregone conclusion. Indigenous actors interacted with British actors as representatives of their own communities and nations. The HBC has become a part of Canadian history, but it's the story that predates Canada, the making of which is only one small telling. In other words, the history of the Hudson's Bay Company is a global story of our global era. And again, even back then, they recognized that we were sovereign. They recognized that we were the ones that they had to talk to. We didn't have anybody coming in to speak for us, and that goes back to how we start, asserting and implementing our laws. It was recognized years ago by people, the first traders who were coming in, and sometimes you'll hear me talk about the first settlers being, we had a good relationship, it was okay, right? They understood that there was an economy, that we were trading, that we were getting something from them. Really, it was the gold rush that was the most detrimental. I think it was the impact of that population. Again, the beaver, he was the star of the show back then, and must have been plentiful. Again, it shows a management that we had in place to make sure that there was enough resources on our lands to not only look after us, but to then be trading with other nations. And you can't really see this map, but it's a map of all of the different nations in BC, and that they covered the entire province. And they're still there. Like, none of them have gone away. So a central social aspect of this economic enterprise was extensive intermarriage between traders and Indigenous women. This gave rise to an Indigenous fur trade society that blended Indigenous and European customs and attitudes. Historically, the fur trade played a singular role in the development of Canada. It provided the motive for the exploration of much of the country. The trade remained the economic foundation of Western Canada until about 1870. The fur trade also determined the relatively peaceful patterns of Indigenous European relations in Canada. So it was a relationship, again, that we had with the British colonies, I guess. And the reason it talks about 1870, I believe BC became in 1871, is when BC became a province. And what that did, what the king did, is he opened it up for settlement, started offering lands to the settlers. And so there was this big influx that came over them. Just showing you where we are in the agenda. So what the courts have said, and it's unfortunate that we've been in court for years. There's all kinds of court cases out there, and we still have to keep going back and proving that we have title to our territory. It's really unfortunate that we can't say, you prove to us that in the 150 years you've been here, you actually own the land, compared to the 10,000 years, even longer that we've been here. And we've proven that our pictographs are older than some of the countries out there. And that's very, that's very cool if you think our pictographs could be over 3,000 years old. And they're still there, right? The writing's on the wall, it's there, it's never gonna go away. Like they had these lasting images and these writings out there that we would see forever. So at the time of the Lillooet Tribe Declaration of Sovereignty, this occupation must have been exclusive, meaning when they got together to write the declaration, in their minds they believed that. This means that the land had to have been the exclusive territory of an Indigenous nation, although they could have shared it with another Indigenous nation. And I think that was everything that was going on from 1906 to about 1912. Nations right across the province were getting together and they were, I guess, getting declarations written. And then they were bringing them to the king. Some of them were even traveling over to England to make sure that they could present them. And getting there and only really being turned away. Could you imagine back then them making that journey and getting turned away by the king? But they did it. And so, in this one where it says, shared it with other Indigenous nations, and that's a conversation we have amongst our communities, is our shared territories, and how we go about sharing them, what we can do in these shared territories, who looks after these shared territories. And those are our own laws that we have to create that are not created with the province or with Canada, or even created for them because they're asking us to create them. Right? That's what some of our stories that we talk about, that we are reading, they talk about, the Chilcotin coming down. I think Carl Alexander has a little excerpt in a book. As a child, watching, the Chilcotin come down to rodeo, and they would rodeo over here in Teakit, and they would have the mountain race here, and my Auntie Georgina Redan, I think, might have been one of the only women at the time who was actually racing. Right, so there was a relationship that we started having. I think there was some Chilcotins who got stranded up in Goldbridge, and one of the chiefs had gone to help them. They were buried in the snow, and he said, "We've got to quit fighting. Right, I'm here to help you. We've got to quit having these wars." And so they started getting invited down to the rodeos, and so there was this social relationship that was created with the Chilcotin. Section 35, 1 of the Constitution Act, and I guess as guests here, wouldn't expect that you would know a lot about it, but it's almost gospel to us, or forced upon us. So the Constitution is the supreme law of Canada. Canada's Constitution includes the Constitution Act 1867 and the Constitution Act 1982. It sets out the basic principles of democratic government in Canada and includes Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 explicitly recognizes and affirms the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. Section 35 also indicates that the term Aboriginal peoples of Canada includes the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada. Métis is a whole other discussion. Probably won't have that one here. But we had to be written into the Constitution. If you know us, we all have a number. Anybody who is status, we have a number, we have to have a card. Then, any non-Indigenous have a number or a card that they have to produce to say, this is who I am. And, we have to do that, right? We're still wards under the government, right? So this is something that, we have to struggle with, we have to fight, we have to recognize that we were the first people here, that we are the first people. We have to get them to recognize that we shouldn't have to walk around with a number or even a card to prove who we are.
And it expires.
And it expires, so we can actually be expired Indians.
And you're no longer
Well, that's what we say, has expired, but it does, right? And so that's just some of the INAC issues we have to deal with. Can't see that one. Actually, I can go back. Oh, there we go. Just a minute. So limits on Aboriginal title. So land and resource uses cannot destroy Aboriginal people's relationship to the land. Arguable that this is a limitation on both the Crown and Aboriginal title. Crown may interfere with Aboriginal title provided the interference is justified. Justification requires the Crown to show that their interference is in furtherance of a compelling and substantial legislative objective and is consistent with the fiduciary relationship between the Crown and the Aboriginal peoples. This requires consultation and accommodation in keeping with the honor and good faith of the Crown. So what that means, and it's consultation and accommodation, right, they'll come to us, industry or government. Government used to have to come to us, and they would have to consult, and then they kind of put the duty on to industry, saying, no, you go do it, you just come back and you tell us that you consulted with the natives, and you'll be able to go forward. What they've also said on the limits is that we can't hinder industry. We can't hinder some of the progress without having a really good excuse or telling them that, no, that place we've used continuously, that we still go out there and harvest. We have to prove all these things to industry. And if we can't, then there's almost permission for them to go in and do the development. And we're not there to hinder it. It's just looking at, is it respectful and is it sustainable? And, always, yes?
Just a question, is that what happened recently with Joffrey Lake and the park? Where the indigenous tribe closed the park for their own usage for a certain point in time?
Yes. Right, and I think that was, they were looking at wanting to exercise that right. And for some reason, they kind of opened it up halfway through, so they had a discussion, and most of the time it's the provinces getting too much pressure from the people. There's their constituents, and they'll go and they'll talk about it, say, look, we're getting, threats and everything. Goes me, I'd say, well, tell them to call me, right? If they want to threaten me, then, go ahead. But usually that's what it is. We've always had to kind of listen to what they were saying, just with their constituents and what they go through. Right, which is unfortunate. That people have to get that way, but we need to be very clear now. When development comes in, and I've told Aspen, I've told Interwest, that when they come in, they've got to quit spending money up front. Come and talk to us and see, are we gonna be okay with you going in to start laying out ribbon? Because as soon as they start looking and laying out ribbon, that's costing them money. Trying to save them some money by saying, yeah, maybe you can go in there, no, you can't go in there. It's not our job to manage their risk. It's their financial risk they're taking, but for some reason it comes back on us. And they blame us, for money that they've already spent. We have to get into those financial institutions and tell them, this isn't our fault that they went and spent all that money. And, now they're crying about it.
Yeah.
Right? So those are the things, and that's just common sense. Right? You don't go spend money if you're not going to make it back. Right? But that's the large industries over the years being able to do that. And if they can't get their money back, guess who subsidizes them? The government, which is really the taxpayers. Right? So you got to start letting those people know out there, you're not even supposed to be managing their risk. Why should we have to manage their financial risk? And the Calder decision, so I wanted to put in some of the key court cases out there which start helping us asserting title, jurisdiction, claiming that ownership, that authority. So the Calder decision, even though they lost the case, Frank Calder was an MP, I believe, and he would have been elected back in the early 70s from Nisga'a area maybe. So the Calder case, named for politician and Nisga'a chief Frank Calder, who brought the case before the courts, reviewed the existence of Aboriginal title or ownership, claimed over lands historically occupied by the Nisga'a peoples of northwestern British Columbia. While the case was lost, the Supreme Court of Canada ruling nevertheless recognized for the first time that Aboriginal title has a place in Canadian law. So that's when all the communities seen that it was recognized. And, there was more people getting together. Some of the larger organizations started being organized. And people were the chiefs were getting together going, how do we move forward? Lawyers were showing up in droves going, we'll help you. It's like, good, we can't pay you, but you can help us. So I just wanted to share that case, even though it was lost, that was where our title was recognized. Leo?
Just really quickly too, that within the Indian Act, we couldn't even hire a lawyer to fight. So as we move forward, even if we wanted to, because it was against the law.
Yeah. And even, I think there's a part of our history, and you'll notice I went from, the fur trade right into, some of these court cases, because that's a whole other discussion, right? Some of the grievances, the trauma, the horrific experiences that we had to go through. But I think it's really important at some time that we have that conversation so you understand who we are, or even why you think the way you do about who we are. So Delgamuukw, I don't know why I thought it was 1999, but for some reason we got 97 there. So the Delgamuukw case, 1997, also known as Delgamuukw versus British Columbia, concerned the definition, the content, and the extent of Aboriginal title, example, ownership of traditional lands. The Supreme Court of Canada observed that Aboriginal title constituted an ancestral right protected by Section 35(1) of the Constitution Act, 1982, influenced by the Calder case, 1973. The ruling in the Delgamuukw case had an impact on other court cases about Aboriginal rights and title, including the Chilcotin case. And I remember, that being announced, and the chiefs, everybody, were just happy. They were all celebrating, the ruling of this. And again, lawyers showing up in droves, wanting to help us. And this case was a big part of, some of you might remember, having the Sát'meca Land and Resource Authority put in place, the land use plan. Gasper?
Pre all these dates, it's 1750, the royalty of England, the federal government, and the First Nations wrote up a contract to share resources. Everybody's claiming ownership. First Nations, royal family, federal government. 1750. They did that, and all the monies went to England for the First Nations. 1913, the Ottawa wanted the monies in Ottawa for the First Nations. But at the same time, they dissolved our ownership of sharing the resources extracted from our territories. At that time, it was $2 trillion. The interest rate per year, $35 billion.
Yes.
We were never in control of those monies. We're always subjugated to whatever rules and regulations that counties, province, Canada would set out. We were never given any heads up. We were never really educated. We're always subjugated to being taught poor history. This is the way of the First Nations. We actually do not know where the $2 trillion went. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's saying how you can access all these Indian trust fund monies. There is no way of accessing them.
Thank you.
Can we get a lawyer now?
They probably want to get a bunch of band managers together to talk about finance. Right, that's a whole other beast, and we can laugh about it, but it's not really a laughing matter. We have to deal with it, right? And we've somehow adapted to it, which we shouldn't have had to, right? Does anybody, in any of your ancestors in your home countries, like, are they subjected to this? Do they have to have a card? Do they have a number? Do they have an INAC that tells them this is how you're spending money and this is how much we're going to give you? Like, I don't know, is that what happens in England with their, like, I have no idea why it's on us, even other countries.
But in 1750, they did acknowledge First Nations were claiming ownership on resources in the territories. So that is acknowledgement in 1750.
Yeah. Kathleen?
And as the provinces were developed in Canada, the federal government actually developed agreements between each province for resource sharing, so that provinces could claim resources as their own for their economic development.
I gotta say something. And that brings me back to truth and reconciliation of our people. And I get emotional, that's okay. I did interviews with our elders regarding the Sát'meca territory and how we use our land and resources, and the rules, the family traditions, and the cultural practices throughout our whole territory. I interviewed over 200 people in the Sát'meca territory on the use of our land and how we occupy it. And I also listened to the elders on the truth and reconciliation. Now I understand it. As Michelle is talking about all the laws, it's finally put in one place. The truth of what happened to our people. And how are they going to reconcile the damage that's been done? I'm a survivor, and my parents were. I never understood a lot of it because of the way we were raised. And the resources are natural. How I live my life is natural for me. And that was all taken away. And now we have to fight back for it. And to understand it. I mean, it's a laughing matter. But it's not funny on what happened to our people. And to understand the laws of our people, our family laws, and how they destroyed that to destroy us. But we're still here and thankful for our ancestors that were strong enough to continue our cultural practices and the language. There's a lot of the language that is spoken that is not English. And it's very hard to transform into English. And you all probably knew Albert Joseph. He was one of the main people of the history of our people. And to understand the Delgamuuk, the Chilcotin, that's why 4 or 5 years ago we started the Sept Government Services to acknowledge our use and ownership of our territory from the northern and the southern Saskatchewan. And we do use it, right down to the youngest ones that I interviewed. You know, some of the children, you got to involve them because they remember. They remember. 6 years old, I interviewed them and I asked them, where did you go with your grandma? Or what did you do with your mom? Show me on this map. And they can tell you. So that's history of what was passed down from generation to generation. That's our laws, our family laws, our cultural practices and traditions, which is not lost as much as the residential school era, that square box in there, how to take that away. They didn't take it all, they took some. And I want to thank you all for being here and thank you for allowing me to speak. It's not to say something.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. You know, because, you know, when we look at this, and, you know, in 1997, the Statlium started gathering and putting our laws, our land uses, our tribal codes together, our application processes. It all was being put together. And, you know, when I'm reviewing everything now, and, you know, DRIPA or UNDRIP was on everybody's brain, we put all that work together. There was notification forums that went on, and Chief Gary John was the Statlium chairperson at the time, and I recall him being really feared as the chief. Like, he was very strong and aggressive and assertive at the table, how you want to be as a leader. And this notification forum that they had, and it was over in Keep, and it was to introduce our land use plan, our laws, the codes, the process that we were going to have for everybody to move forward. And the industry, everybody showed up. They're like, how are we going to be moving forward? Is there certainty for us to move forward? There was a way at that time that we were starting to exercise our title and our right to the territory. And people were acknowledging that we had that right to be managing, to tell people how it was going to be used, how we were going to benefit from that. So we have a lot of really good work. We have work in a Statlium that we need to start just getting out there. And we will. That is one of my main jobs, is to make sure that what the work that we started back then gets implemented. And I take that very seriously, and I think with the experience that I've had over the years, I'm well suited to do it. So I look forward to doing that. So Delcamille continued. If present occupation is invoked as evidence of occupation before sovereignty, there must be a continuity between present occupation and occupation before the declaration of sovereignty. In other words, there must be evidence of a continuous ownership of the land. However, it is not necessary to prove a perfect continuity. The demonstration of substantial maintenance of the bond between the people and the territory is sufficient. In this respect, the Supreme Court held that oral evidence could be admitted as proof. Right, so we're getting all of these decisions in our favor, and we need to be able to use them. I think a lot of us want to use them without having to go to court. Right, why should we have to go to court and prove this when we can take you out on the land and show you? It's a lot cheaper, you get, it's healthy, you go out to lunch, you have a conversation, you don't need lawyers involved, but sometimes I think lawyers are just, making a career for themselves. So the Chilcotin, and that was, a day of celebration. Not only for the Chilcotin, but I think for all of us. So the Chilcotin Nation has never surrendered or ceded their lands. The Chilcotin Nation began legal proceedings against British Columbia in 1989 to stop the harvesting of timber in the Brittany Triangle and the Trapline Territory. The judgment by Justice Vickers was proof of Aboriginal title and called to question the legitimacy of provincial government licensing policies within Chilcotin Territory. In 2010, the Chilcotin Nation appealed the ruling by Justice Vickers, and in 2012 appealed the Supreme Court of Appeals judgment. And if anybody followed that, they actually held court out in the Chilcotin territories, and they had a lot of oral evidence by their elders who only spoke Chilcotin. And again, they had diaries from the Oblates who talked about how they seen the economy, the interactions, the social aspect of the Chilcotin when they got there. On June 26, 2014, for the first time in Canadian history, the Supreme Court of Canada declared the Chilcotin Nation Aboriginal title to a small portion of the territory within the area of the Honey-Wet'en, or the Nehemiah Valley. The Supreme Court of Canada further declared that British Columbia breached its duty to consult with the Chilcotin in its planning and forestry authorizations, commonly referred to as the Chilcotin decision. This decision allows for full ownership, benefit, and control of the Aboriginal title area by the Chilcotin people. So they put in that hard work, right? They paved the way. If you talk to the lawyer who they had, I think it was Jack Woodward, maybe, and he talks about the land that they got. He goes, it's really high alpine, there's no trees, there's really no resources. It's like, well, what happened to the land they were going to harvest? Why did they give them this small little piece of land that they hold title to? And it's fee simple. It goes back to what Chief Kathleen was talking about, is that's what the government wants from us. If we went and claimed the entire Sát'meca Nation, which we will, which we have, the government will try to consider that fee simple. I think we would have to look at that because we probably, I don't know, we would have called it taxation, taxis, I think is a word that they use over in the Sát'meca. That you had to pay your way to be in the community. If you wanted that, if you wanted the benefits of living in the community, you still had to give back something. It probably would have been, 5 fish for a canoe, just things like that. But the land that they got back, for whatever reason, maybe to them, maybe it's spiritual, maybe it's for harvesting, but there was no monetary benefit that they were really going to get from it. And we're going to go meet with the Chilcotin chiefs in about a month up in Williams Lake, and then we're going to go to Williams Lake, or Quesnel, and we're going to go to the memorial where their 7 chiefs were hung. And have that day with them. But I think for us as the Statlium, and we had a relationship with them, it's really looking at how did they prepare? What did they have to do to get into court? What is it that they did, that we may already have, because what I see is the government is dealing with them. They're creating all these templates and agreements that we may have to adopt. We have to make sure they've got really good people working for them, right? You just can't have somebody in there who's just making a career out of working with the Indians or there to get a paycheck. You need to make sure that you got some solid people who are looking out for you. We don't want to be having to say, yeah, we've got title, show us your template agreement, we'll sign it. Right? That's not who the Statlium ever worked. It's getting the strength of the Chiefs back in 2004 when they had that notification forum. Very strong voices were heard in that room. Aspects of title of key relevance in the resource management and use context include the right to choose what uses the land can be put. In other words, title is a foundation for Aboriginal jurisdiction, including stewardship, responsibilities, and ecosystem-based management. The right to the land and resources itself, including the right to exclusive use and occupation. In other words, title is inseparable from land and resource use and allocation decisions. An inescapable economic component which led to shared benefits. And this is something that we would have done even before settlers got here. We would have had, we would have had the right to use. We would have had the right to occupation. We would have had the right to tell what we were going to share. Gasper?
I'm curious, the general population seeks up for what is good and true and of a benefit for everybody. And normally we speak up when something is being implemented or contractually was never signed. Because in 1960, I think I'm going on what I read up on and elitists somewhat threw our governments, both the United States and Canada, into a funk as to who controls the skies. Because right since 1960, we've had planes flying overhead, inundating us with all types of chemicals that we have no idea what they are. Normally, that something like that would have to be publicized. Since the 1960s, we've had these, I would say that they've been contributory to our climate change. It's not climate change. We've been suffering this since the 1960s. People are asking, why are the forests burning so fast? They've only been dumping aluminum since the 60s, preconditioning all our forests. They've even gone as far as to do that in the United States. They made California a drought-stricken state. We're suffering drought situations nowadays because we have no control with our skies. We never signed a contract. I do not condone it. But we still have planes flying overhead, inundating us with all types of chemicals. You people and your parents probably have seen this, and nobody's speaking up against it. And it's a continued factor worldwide. There is a site called geoengineeringwatch.org. It gives you somewhat of a heads up as to what is happening to the world in general, except for the communist countries or the countries that are dictated on. But worldwide, we are inundated by these scientists are even sanctioning it. Politicians are being mum about it. just a little bit of info from my site.
Thank you. When we go to duty of consultation and accommodation, again, we're always asking to prove, you know, that we were here first. And so I like to show, you know, what we had, what we used in our community, and that these were tools that we can still be using today. You know, there would have been a lot of jade. We found a lot of jade artifacts in my community. And Checowash were tool makers, and you'll find mortars and pestles, you'll find grinding stones. We found jade adzes or axes there, and it just shows the workmanship, you know, that our people had. And again, where we have the places in our community to make these tools, we still needed the water, we needed the sand, we needed the pitch. We had to have all of these uses. So it's always hard when somebody says, prove to us you were here, and we could take them right out and show them. Or take them to the museum and say, how about you bring all of our artifacts and go put them back on the land, because they would cover the entire territory. I've gone to a museum for a repatriation, brought 18 of our ancestors home, and when they opened the door, and I don't know if it was a vault or whatever they want to call it, but it was just filled with cardboard boxes of not only our remains, our ancestors, but of our artifacts, our tools that were in there. And they shouldn't be there, right? If you're hiding them away, let them come out, bring them home, let's put them back on the land. And I always tell people, we can't be removing our existence, right? If you start removing everything from the land, we're going to cease to exist, and we won't be able to tell our children, their children, who their ancestors were and where they were on the land. Again, some of the key cases that helped pave the way for us if we ever decided to go into court, or just to prove title. I think we can prove title in a statute without having to go to court. And that needs to be something that we need to do. And so it would have been the Delgamu case, the Haida Nation, the Taku River, the Skeena Salimos. Every one of these nations had to go to court. We did here for fishing. You hear the Bradley Bob case happened here, where it was just asserting their right to go out and fish. DFO trying to put these closures on. Well, DFO doesn't know how to manage fish. They manage people. And people need to understand that. That they've actually put us in a situation. They don't understand the fishery. They don't understand that half of the salmon that come up the Fraser have to go above our nation to go and spawn. The salmon that spawn in our nation, we don't even eat. They're to feed the nations below us, right? So we're dependent on what goes above Bridge River Rapids. If fish aren't making it above there, we're not gonna eat. We're going to starve. And what that does is it starts taking away the ability to teach our children about the language, the traditions, the culture of even getting ready to go fishing. The walk down to the fishing grounds, the art of fishing, how to make the nets, how to fillet, how to dry, how to clean. All of that gets lost when our food sovereignty, our food is scarce or it's being taken from us. And that's what we're watching. And when you start seeing how upset we get, it's because this is what we're living. This is a truth that we are living, that we're trying to make changes in. So the duty requires both the process by which allocation of a resource occurs, so the consultation, and the actual allocation of the resource resulting from the process, the accommodation, reflect the underlying or prior interest of the Aboriginal peoples. The interests which must be accommodated are not only economic but cultural. The scope of consultation and the strength of the obligation to seek an accommodation is proportional to the strength of claim of Aboriginal title and rights. And so they're telling us right there, you have to have a strong claim or we're not going to accommodate you the way that you want to be accommodated. Right? So strength of claim to them is very different than the strength of claim to us. We're just, excited when we see our history out there, when we're able to touch it, when we're able to go where our ancestors were. And most will look at us go, it's just a hole in the ground. It's just a strip taken off the tree, but it's everything that goes with the process of making that hole in the ground or stripping the tree. There's a way of life that has to be followed to be able to do those things. There's laws. We have people who are out there just stripping trees because they want to know how to do it. They're not actually using the bark that they're stripping. If they were brought into a community or sat in a circle of elders, they'd probably be scolded. But then they would be told, this is how you need to do it. What you're doing is wrong, but this is what you need to do. Right? So that would have never happened back in our day. We would have had to use that bark, not just go out and practice, so we knew how to do it. So when does duty arise? The duty exists prior to a court decision confirming the existence and scope of these rights under Section 35 of the Constitution. Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 explicitly recognizes and affirms the existing Aboriginal treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. Section 35 also indicates that the term Aboriginal peoples of Canada includes the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada. And just to go back more for your information, so treaty, most of BC we don't have treaties. And you'll, if you understand treaties, they've got like treaty number 1 to 8. And so that's what they're called. Treaty 1 is over in the East Coast, and there's Treaty 2, and we have a little bit of Treaty 8 up in the northern part of our province. And so we don't have that. I don't understand treaty. It's not a conversation I've ever really had about treaty. I know that they get accommodations, some revenue, but I don't really get. If they lost anything, I couldn't really speak to it. Métis, there's a lot of resistance coming from us who are not treaty or not Métis on why they've got so much rights. Right now, the government seems to be bending over backwards, and they get all kinds of settlements. They're getting accommodated. They go to court. They get a lot of funding. So there's resistance that's coming from, the group of chiefs, the 3 organizations. They're really looking at that. Why are they being accommodated? And I think it's an answer that we'll get down the road, but we'll see where that goes. Why they get accommodated. So much I understand, it was probably like the Ukrainian settlers coming down and marrying in. That's what they talk about, the fur trade, how the intermarriages happen. Well, then you get half-breeds. So they're claiming a status. They've got it now. They're actually named in our Constitution. And maybe they've got laws. I don't know how old they are, or if they just adopted them from the Cree, if they brought over some. That's something that we would have to look at. Who has the duty? The duty to consult is the Crown obligation, which must be implemented honorably and in good faith. Yeah, we'll just skip because that does not happen yet. In some instances, the duty will also be an obligation of non-governmental parties. And from what I've seen, the government is kind of putting the duty on industry, saying you go do it and report back to us that you've actually consulted with the communities. And sometimes we create a good working relationship. We can have harsh words, we can have awkward conversations, but you start seeing what companies would like to do. But then you start seeing where their policies and their laws that they're having to follow start conflicting with ours, which would be more sustainable. Aboriginal nations cannot avoid consultation. At a minimum, Aboriginal nations must engage in the process to the degree of acquiring the necessary information and expressing their interests and concerns. And that last bullet there, that was one of the reasons, I think, well, not one of them, but why we have the Sát'meca land use plan. And I've been reviewing it, and it's great work, right? If people want to ask us how they go about development in our territory, we've got the resource put together to be able to tell them. There has to be a cost to that, though. Like, they're paying somebody else to do work for them. That seems to be the struggle all the time. Well, we don't want to pay you to do it. Well, then we can't do the work, and you're not going to be able to do any work out on the land. And so we've developed an invoicing system. We've got a costing method, a billing method of how we can go about this. But, where it says we cannot avoid consultation, again, that's the government telling us that we have to have this, that we have to abide by their laws, and if we don't, then the companies can go in and just do whatever it is that they want to do. And we've been trying to avoid that, right? But sometimes you can't. I think a lot of us have been at the front line of industry, nose to nose with them, and it's never their fault. It's the government, and you got to try to tell industry that it's the fault of the government because they're putting the duty on them to accommodate us. So we can have those working relationships. We can sit down with them. We can look at how do they understand their laws? Can they understand the laws that we're going to be putting in place? Because our laws can't align with legislation. They were never developed that way. They were never written that way to align with legislation. So again, you have government coming in going, oh no, we need your laws to align. It's like, so what, 204 communities in BC, and we're all going to have different laws, and they want them to align. That's an impossible task to do, but they're asking us to do it. But we just have to tell them we can't do it that way. We have to do, what we can do here is just to make sure that we're letting people know this is the way that you operate in our territory. Jasper?
Our laws and colonial laws are different in that governments, be it federal or provincial or state, have lobbyists. Lobbyists' concerns are generally for resource extraction. They're there to sway or dissuade resource extraction organizers, people who deal with all these rules and regulations, and we need some sort of implementation of change in wording that lobbyists have allowed our governments and rules and regulations to be made in favor of resource extractors, so that we could gain control out of all the resources that are being stripped, be it forest or mining or fisheries. We just need something that's going to counter that. We can't just sit idly back and let it happen. Right now, we're in turmoil as to fisheries. I got maybe 5 fish this year. When I was a kid in 1961, I put my net in the river, I pulled out 20. We're going backwards.
Yeah, really backwards. That's why I said DFO can't manage fish. They don't know how, they don't understand the system, and it's very complex where all these salmon are going and where they're coming from. Some are coming from the States. Some runs are, you've got 7 different species coming up at the same time, and then they go and put, species at risk in there, and then saying, okay, well, no, we've got a species at risk, so you can't go fishing because there's going to be a species coming through. So salmon is something very complex to the government. To us, we knew about it. We had all of these ways of how we went. We had watchmen go down to the river watching salmon go by, and as soon as they seen enough go up for spawning and to feed our northern brothers and sisters, then we were called down to go fish. Right? I've heard chiefs on the coast say we never even fished sockeye before. Now they are, because of their other runs out there have been depleted. Right? But back in the day, if we had these resources that weren't balancing out, say the Sát'meca, they would be invited over. Right? We would have been invited over there. We've had tribes that are getting fish from the north. And it's really impacting their health because it's fatty. Where you get them here, they're kind of like lean and mean, and they're really good. Up there, you're getting very greasy, fatty fish, and it's not something that our system is used to. So when we talk about having to get ourselves organized, I think we're there. It's government keeps coming back, and even when, you know, Kim had asked, can you do something on Statland laws? And I kind of wonder, what does that mean to non-Indigenous people? Like, what was it that you were expecting about Statland laws, that we were going to have this system of order and process, where we have to tell everybody our laws can't align with the government, with the Constitution. They can't do it because they're just different. It's about how we go about life. If it's only take what you need, then everybody has to be practicing that. There wouldn't even be industry, because forestry doesn't need millions of cubics of meters of wood, right? The commercial fishermen don't need millions and millions of tons of fish. So for us, it's just about how we go about our relationship, our partnership with the land, and that we respect it. And, you know, when you go forward, and there was a reason I didn't want to talk about, you know, a part of our life that really disrupted us, because we lost a way of life, right? There's a reason that we don't understand a lot of these good ways. We know it here, and we know it up here, but we weren't taught how to practice it. Nobody showed us how to go and do these things, because they weren't there to teach us. They were in residential school, or they were, you know, turning to alcoholism. There was deaths. There was all these things that got in our way. So, you know, when we start moving forward and you have these questions, or you wonder, or, you know, even the stereotypes of who you thought we were, because those came from conversations you probably had around the dinner table. And maybe even your parents or your grandparents didn't understand that part of our history that interrupted us, that took away that knowledge sharing, the traditions being able to be passed on. Nobody was there to show us, right? You had adults in a community, but you had no children. So they couldn't even pass on that tradition because there was no kids for them to teach. And so that's a reality that we're dealing with right now, right? So sometimes it'll be a sensitive conversation, but we definitely know here in the Statland that we can do this, that we can get out there, that we can work with industry, but that respecting how we go forward and how we see the land and use it has to be up here. It's not something that we say, oh, can you accommodate our berry picking area? Right? It's there for a reason. Right? It might be there for all of us to go and use. Right? And you've got to actually make your way around watersheds. You just can't go and over-harvest a watershed. So there's all these ways that we would go about how we moved out on land. And that's what we want to be sharing. Right? Because that's one of our laws, that we have to share the knowledge that we know, that we have to pass on these traditions. So with that, Kathleen?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, when you do read the documents that and in DRIPA, the obligation for Canada and BC is to meet the minimum standards. And what we cry out as Indigenous nations is we want the maximum standards to be met and accommodated. And this is where the fight starts, because they're putting us in a direct relationship to industry. When Canada is offloading its fiduciary obligation for wholesome and well-being First Nations, which they've drastically failed in, offloading it to industry. So we know where their care and what they want to consult in is directly related to their corporation status. So how are we going to change that? You've got to be at the bottom line. You've got to be on the ground with us.
Yes. Thank you. And I agree with that. They always say minimum standards. Well, that's probably the lowest standards. Like, I don't know why anybody would agree to minimum standards, because that's why we're all in this position, that's why we have grievances with the government. That's why our province is burning down, because they're using minimum standards of management out there, and it'll take all of our voices collectively to start making those changes. Yes?
I just want to comment on that, and I'm going to maybe say this slightly controversial way. I actually think the opportunity exists to set a higher standard than what they see as the maximum standard. I think in the process, if you just think about the legal basis of Western traditional law, it's 200 years old and it's way out of date.
Yep.
So its maximum standard is still crap.
Yep.
Absolutely crap. What you have as an opportunity right now, because you have this problem, we have this problem, I shouldn't say you, is to actually set the bar much, much higher than that maximum standard. So don't aim as low as their maximum standard, aim for your standard. And I'm here to help with that, so.
No, that's good, thank you, because that's what we like to hear, and that's what our land use plan, when we started developing it, and the application process and the permit process, we had all that developed, it just kind of got put over here for a little while. Now it's time to bring it up, and it is higher standards of how you operate, how you move, how you go about talking, like doing things in our territory. But like I said, people looked at it and went, we're never going to make any money, including some of our communities who were in industry, involved logging or forestry, right? So it's not, it's just having the conversation, how can we do things better out there without having to manage everyone's financial risk? And like I said, come and talk to us first to see if you can even approach the land. Because if you can't, we'll save you some money. Right? So that's a law right there. Leo?
Just one last comment is, if we really think about how the laws of the First Nations really affect us, whoever thought that they would ever sit down and actually have to buy a bottle of water? Right? Because of all of the watersheds being depleted and the water being as bad as it. Where did we ever think, and especially Noah, I know what you're going through in the township of getting good potable water that you deserve just as much as we deserve, and we're still fighting for potable water on our reserve. But industry and the government have come in, they see the dollar, the bottom line, and bang, they have it. But guess what? We're still standing at the grocery store buying water.
Yeah.
So what's next? Here? I'm just being facetious, of course, but you know, what's next?
We're all going to have helium balloons. And that's how we're going to converse. Well, with that, I just really want to say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to Kim for asking us. Thank you to Kate for helping put all of this together and helping with the research and facilitating, Kathleen for being here. And you know, for some of the discussions, I don't know if there's any more questions, but I do work at the Sát'meca Chiefs Council, and I'm always open to be talking about Sát'meca and our laws and our way of life.
I just wonder if there can be part two, if we can have a future. We've all got this basis now that you've so beautifully shown to us. Can it be a part two? I find this is truth today,
Yeah.
but I still don't know what I can do for reconciliation, other than support all these. I just don't know, so I wonder if there can be a part two.
There could probably be that.
The sequel.
Yeah. Yeah. Gasper?
I'd like to ask you to apply for funds for researchers. I know that a lot of First Nations have office workers and chiefs and councils, but they never have research people who do the digging for them. Parliamentarians, be it provincial or federal, have researchers. They utilize them. They give them a goal to set, to search out. You probably have to apply for a fund that'll garnish you some researchers to do the digging. Be it high school students, be it college students, be it university students who are maybe delving into some structure that you're striving for. It's similar to networking. We never seem to do complete networking. We're very small on networking. It's kind of a request that you apply for funds to get some researchers to help you facilitate part two.
Yes.
Yeah, and that vision is kind of being realized, and with Kate working with us and as the SCC policy analyst, and she's got a great background in her education. She's been working around the world. She's got ties to Statlium. But we touched base with ILRU, which is the Indigenous
Law Research
Law
Unit.
Research Unit through the University of Victoria. And they've worked with several other nations throughout the province and helping them develop laws. Some of it was through the stories, some of it, I guess mostly through stories and some of the ways that they moved up. So we're asking them to come in, and a lot of it, what I think we want to be doing is the engagement, having these conversations. Because like I tell everybody, if we're not talking about what we're doing, then nobody knows what we're doing, right? So that's why you have to have, sessions like this, and lots of them. We have to bring the land use plan back to the people, because that was developed in 2004. So people back then, there's, babies, some people today weren't even born yet. So we need to introduce all of these documents. But they will actually look for the funding, and they are researchers. They're actually law students, articling students. The fellow, Dr. John Burrows, he's actually a teacher, a professor for University of Victoria. So he may be, hopefully, somebody that might come to our community and talk about these laws that come from our stories. So we're definitely working at that. Kathleen?
I just wanted to share that there have been 3 major studies done that I am aware of, and one is the land use and occupancy study, which was done with the 11 communities. Right now we're working on a information sharing agreement so that we can share what was developed at each community with one another. That will help develop our laws. We've had 2 re-law studies that we haven't. The first re-law was presented at one of the political gatherings. The second one is not quite finished, but these are very important, knowledgeable documents that could help us in the development of our laws, because these are the actual stories and the information, historical information shared by our elders, and a lot of them are passed on. So to me, they are very sacred. So these could help start forming part 2, part 3, and 4 going forward.
Yeah. You can find RELAW online, though. If you search Statlium RELAW Project, you can find that article. And when we build out our website, we'll have a reading list.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's lots of work, but we need to get it out there. We need to be engaging with everybody. If nobody knows we have it, they're never going to be able to implement it, especially the kids coming, because they're the ones that we're going to be depending on to do this. Right? We're creating this for them so they have opportunity. And just this picture here, so this is Graveyard Valley, and that's where we moored with the Chilcotin, and so it's a root gather, it's a harvesting area that we have graves up there. This summer there was a group from Shalath. There was going to be some chiefs from the Statlium and the Chilcotin, but the fires and blowdown got in the way of them getting out there. So they went out and they put a plaque out there, just dedicating to the war, and that we buried the hatch. We had a bury the hatch ceremony. So we had this, one of the relationships we have is with the Chilcotin, which I think is great because they've paved the way for title. And I just want to talk to them about how we go about it. What is it that they did so it's work that we don't have to do? Maybe we check the boxes. Okay, we've got all this. Now we're ready. We call it our war chest. We're building up our war chest, and it's getting ready to go to court. Are we court ready? Maybe, right? Maybe we can be claiming title to the entire Statlium, right? But according to the courts, it might just be a small little postage stamp, but we don't want to be there. We want the entire Statlium declaring title for us. So with that, just going to say thank you, everybody, and look forward to the next session.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you all for coming, and maybe just before you leave, if you could write down 3 things that you learned from this session that are going to help you move forward. And I just want to thank Michelle for coming, powerful speaker, and amazing. That was an amazing presentation.
Yeah.
Yes, it was really. And I just want to thank Barb Shan for her wisdom and her love. This lady.